Welcome to our Basic Rigging Principles course about general safety. Safe rigging practices are vital to ensuring the safety of your worksite. To use safe practices, you must first understand the basic process of rigging. While each job varies, some safety principles apply to all jobs. This course will help you understand some of those principles. By the end of this course, you will be able to identify the general rigging process and its roles, remember how to safely prepare for rigging, recall safe rigging practices, and recognize how to inspect and safely store rigging equipment. Each rigging job is different. Factors like what you are rigging, where you are, what equipment you use, and who is involved all influence the process. Generally, though, we can identify 3 phases of the rigging process: preparing for the job, doing the job, and inspecting and storing the equipment. Let's go over each of these phases in more detail. Preparation is vital to safe rigging operations. We must analyze the job and its hazards, organize a crew, prepare and plan for the job, and make sure everyone attends a pre-job briefing to learn about important safety information. A job hazard analysis identifies the potential hazards associated with a rigging job, including their severity and probability. It also identifies how to reduce their risks to an acceptable level. A competent person will be in charge of completing the job hazard analysis. However, it is truly a team effort. They will ask for input from supervisors, experienced employees, and health and safety professionals to make sure they get multiple perspectives and advice. Some of the questions that the job hazard analysis should answer include: what could go wrong? For example, could equipment tip over or fail? What are the consequences? For example, could people be hurt or killed? Or could property be damaged? How could the hazard happen? In other words, what conditions could cause the hazard? For example, equipment might fail if it is defective or used incorrectly. How likely is it that the hazard will occur? Is the probability high or low? How severe could the consequences be if the hazard happens? For example, if people could die, then the risk is critical. Finally, how will we control the hazard? What will we do to make sure it doesn't happen, or that, if it does, we reduce the risk to an acceptable level? Another step in preparing for rigging jobs is to organize the crew. Every rigging job should have one person who is in charge of ensuring that people perform the job safely. We refer to this person as the lift director. Lift directors are experienced people in supervisory roles. They are not part of the rigging crew and are not crane operators. The lift director must be qualified and competent, or be competent with qualified assistance. The lift director must review and understand all the procedures of the job and verify that all crew members understand their tasks, responsibilities, and the hazards associated with the work. In most cases, a competent rigger will determine what rigging equipment should be used for each job. The lift director and competent rigger will work together to perform 4 basic steps to plan the rigging job. Select each step to review a brief description. One of the most important steps to complete when preparing for a rigging job is to have a pre-job briefing. This is a meeting that the lift director conducts before the work begins. At the meeting, the lift director will explain important information that the crew needs to know, such as the contents of the job hazard analysis. At a minimum, the pre-job briefing will cover the tasks in sequence that the crew will accomplish, the expected results, the responsibilities of each crew member, the methods of communication the crew will use, and any special environmental concerns, such as uneven ground or weather conditions. The pre-job briefing will also cover a discussion of previous operating experience and any lessons learned, a list of job hazards, special precautions, and appropriate controls, such as personal protective equipment and energy source controls, and the procedures, drawings, or other reference documents that the crew must be familiar with and use. The pre-job briefing is also an opportunity for everyone on the crew to share their input, ask questions, and voice and address concerns. Choose the words that best complete these statements about the hazards associated with rigging. After we prepare, it's time to do the job while working safely. This process involves wearing personal protective equipment, maintaining communication with the crew and others in the area, inspecting and then attaching equipment, and using safe practices. Before you start working, inspect and wear the personal protective equipment, or PPE, that the lift director told you about during the pre-job briefing. If PPE is defective, remove it from service. Contact your supervisor for instructions about where to obtain effective PPE. For most rigging jobs, PPE includes hard hats, safety glasses, hearing protection, gloves, safety shoes, and high-visibility vests so that crew members can more easily see your position. Crew members may also need to wear fall protection when working at heights, and shock and arc-rated equipment when working near electrical equipment and overhead power lines. Electrical equipment and power lines should be de-energized, grounded, and/or properly insulated before work begins. What PPE is needed for most rigging jobs? One of the ways to stay safe during rigging jobs is to maintain communication among the crew during operations. Remember that the lift director will explain how they expect the crew to communicate during the pre-job briefing. Communication during rigging jobs may include verbal communication, hand signals, radio communication, or a combination of all three. It may also include making eye contact with team members to make sure that you can see each other and that you see hand signals. It's important to note that everyone on the crew has stop work authority. That means that if at any point during the job you have a question or concern, you can and should call for everything to stop until you understand what to do and have resolved any potential hazards. The way you attach rigging equipment to a load or lifting device will vary depending on the job. We're going to go over some basic safety practices that you can use for all rigging work, but please be aware that this is not a comprehensive list. It's just some basic information that will lay the foundation for additional training you will receive from your employer. The general steps of rigging a load include assembling the load. For example, you may bundle items together and decide on anchor points. Then, you attach slings to the assembly, attach the slings to the lifting device, such as a crane, and lift or move the assembly. Once that is done, you detach the slings from the lifting device and attach the slings from the assembly. Do not drag equipment or use it to drag a load. Treating rigging equipment in this manner can damage it. Only use appropriate attachments as they are intended. For example, don't splice a chain by inserting a bolt between two links or shorten a wire rope by tying it into knots. Check manufacturer documentation for details. Even with safe procedures, rigging jobs can go wrong. Unauthorized people must stay out of the area. Usually, barricades will be in place to prevent people from wandering into hazardous locations. Always think about what could happen if equipment suddenly fails. In other words, don't put any part of your body under a load, and if you are operating lift equipment, don't lift loads over people. Think about the damage a swinging load could do. Make sure personnel are never between a load and a stationary object or structure, such as a building, platform, or tank. As the load is moving, the operator might lose visibility of the area. If the load passes too close to the structure, it could pin or crush nearby workers. This can also happen if the load shifts or the rigging equipment fails. No one is allowed to ride on loads or crane hooks. Do not leave suspended loads unattended. Do everything you safely can to keep loads low and slow. If the load falls, you want the distance to the ground to be as short as possible. Moving the load slowly helps you maintain its balance and correct problems or miscalculations before someone gets hurt or property gets damaged. Do not move loads suddenly so that they jerk or fall. This is called impact loading. These motions increase the stress on the rigging equipment and can damage it or cause it to fail. A tagline is a rope that riggers attach to a load. They hold and use the rope to control the swing and rotation of the load while it is suspended in the air. Sometimes taglines are impractical, or they may increase the potential for hazards. In these cases, the lift director should determine if there are safe alternatives. Riggers should never wrap taglines around any part of their body. For example, don't wrap your hand or arm with the rope to create tension. If a rigger loses control of a load, taglines can be whipped through the air, lashing at people and property. Unused portions of taglines can cause people to trip or may create hazards in which people may become entangled. For these reasons, taglines should be of adequate length, but not any longer than necessary. Learn to anticipate and avoid pinch points when you are handling hooks and tensioning slings. Think about what will happen when tension is applied and how fingers or hands may be caught between the sling and the load. Protect skin and slings from contact with sharp or abrasive surfaces. In other words, wear gloves and use padding between rigging and loads as needed. For example, you may be able to protect slings and spread tension across more distance by placing pipe cross-sections along the sharp edges of a load. When you land a load, make sure slings are not trapped under it. Of course, You should also make sure no part of your body, such as your hands or fingers, are trapped under the load either. Choose the 3 words that should describe the load during a rigging job. Rigging doesn't end after we move the load. We must inspect equipment to make sure it is still in good condition, remove any defective equipment, and safely store equipment so that it remains in good condition and is ready for future use. Inspections are a vital part of rigging safety. Damaged equipment can cause loads to fall, potentially killing or injuring people and damaging equipment and property. Competent people should inspect rigging equipment at the beginning of each day or shift and periodically at intervals of a year or less. For the periodic inspections, they document the condition of each piece of equipment using forms and checklists. Riggers should inspect rigging equipment before using it and after using it. Riggers should also re-inspect equipment for cracks or defects after someone drops it. For example, a drop on a hard surface can create a small fracture in a chain hoist that can turn into a crack in the housing. Remember, equipment that fails can cause loads to fall, injuring people and damaging property. Riggers will receive training about the equipment they will use and must be able to spot obvious defects. Look for wear. For example, some synthetic slings are manufactured with red threads inside the material that indicate excessive wear when they are visible on the surface. If you can see the red threads, the sling is unsafe to use. Check for cracks or damage. Remember that small cracks can become large or cause complete breaks when the equipment is under tension and pressure. Look for torn or damaged webbing. Corrosion is another defect for which you should check. A safety latch that is rusted shut or that doesn't close freely or completely is unsafe. Check chains and slings for kinking. One thing inspectors may forget is to check for missing, faded, or illegible labels. Labels must be visible so that riggers can easily determine their capacity. Of course, look for any other damage or deformities not listed here. Your employer will provide you with more in-depth training about the specific rigging equipment with which you will work and how to inspect it. Competent people will receive in-depth training about the condition equipment must be in. They will look for defects that may be invisible to the naked eye. For example, they will measure the amount of wear on a chain to make sure it falls within safe parameters. They will count the number of broken threads in a wire rope sling to make sure there are not too many. If you are a rigger, focus on obvious defects. And remember that it is always okay to ask a competent person to check equipment if you are unsure about its safety. When equipment fails an inspection, it's not enough to simply set it aside. Instead, follow your employer's procedures regarding defective equipment to prevent others from using it. For example, your employer may require you to tag the equipment as unsafe or lock it away where no one will accidentally use it before the appropriate people can dispose of it or repair it. Which of the following describes a chain on a sling that a rigger needs to remove from service during a pre-use inspection? If equipment passes an inspection and you don't need to use it, be sure to store it safely so that it won't be damaged while it is in storage. For example, slings that you drag or store on the floor may become worn or be exposed to water, dirt, chemicals, or oils that can damage them. Instead, if possible, hang them vertically on racks or pegs or horizontally on trays. Do not store equipment in extreme cold or hot temperatures or in direct sunlight. These conditions can cause it to crack or melt. Sunlight may also cause labels to fade and become illegible. Keep storage areas clean and tidy to reduce the risk of people tripping over things that are on the floor or having objects fall upon them as they look for and select equipment. The manufacturer will usually provide instructions about how to store specific pieces of equipment if you need more information. Put the rigging process in the correct order. Before you continue, please take a moment to review the general ways you can safely complete the rigging process. You should now be able to identify the general rigging process and its roles, remember how to safely prepare for rigging, recall safe rigging practices, and recognize how to inspect and safely store rigging equipment.